All
Mhm.
right. The third and final question for today is, does time heal the hurts in marriage?
Oh, am I starting?
Yeah. What do you think? Does time
Okay.
heal the hurts in marriage?
So it reminds me of that saying, time heals all wounds. Have you heard of that,
I
Chen?
have. I have. I think
Okay.
that's a cliche, isn't it?
Oh, that is okay, Toastmaster. Yep. So it's a cliche. Time heals all wounds. And does time heal the hurts in our marriage? So my thoughts are no, because I think what is more important is what are you doing in the midst of that time? Because we could think in our marriage, communication is awful, and we just say, oh, we're going to wait it out. We're going to bunker down. We're going to wait it out. Eventually, it's going to get better. And I think those of us listening who have challenges with communication, we know that I don't know if that's ever happened to any of us. If it has happened to you, that's amazing. I'm so happy for you. But it doesn't usually work out that way. We have to be intentional and oftentimes do things differently than we did before to heal those different hurts that have been a result of whether it's communication, whether it's infidelity, or whatever we're dealing with in our marriage. So I would say no, time does not heal all wounds. But I will say that when it comes to time, it can change our perspective on certain wounds. But that again is assumptive, because the hope is that we are growing in the midst of that and we're learning about ourselves. We're becoming aware of things. And then I think it allows that change to occur, or that healing to happen.
Yeah. When I think about this question, I think that time makes an incredible tool if we know how to use it properly. So,
Mm-hmm.
time does often reduce the intensity of a wound.
That's good.
So if you and I are in a fight and it's like escalate, 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 we would both benefit from kind of taking a time out and letting
Mm-hmm.
the temperature of the room come back down, right? So maybe
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
there is a dynamic where time will reduce the temperature or the intensity of a wound. So we can benefit from that if we use that tool properly. But I loved what you said is, now, what do we do with that time? So
Mm-hmm.
are we taking steps that'll actually repair? So time will reduce the intensity, but now there's additional steps to actually process healing. So if you do something to me, if you were to come into my office right now and slap me across the face and say that you hate me,
Mm-hmm.
most of what I would say immediately following that would probably not be very helpful
Mm-hmm.
to us repairing. But if a little bit of time goes by, some of that initial shock and frustration and anger and hurt will dissipate. So now I can make a more logical decision of, what do I want to see happen moving forward? What do I
Mm-hmm.
believe God has in store for us? And so then maybe that's forgiveness, right?
Yeah.
Forgiveness is an action step that can actually bring healing in a relationship, not just
Yeah.
time. Extending grace, getting counsel, seeking outside support and help is another thing that can actually bring healing. So I think
Mm-hmm.
what can be valuable for us to think about is, do we need to allow the intensity of the moment to cool down a little bit? And maybe
It's good.
time is a great tool for that. But then what will proactively actually bring healing? And time
Mm-hmm.
is irrelevant to answering that question of what actually brings healing.
Right. Because I think for me, this really hits home, because I understand, when we are in pain, and whether it's within our marriage or maybe there was a loss that we had, someone passed away and it hurts, and we want it to go away, and we're thinking, okay, in time, it's going to go away. And people will tell us in time. But when we look at grief, for example, grief is not methodical, if you will. Like, grief happens, you heal at different rates. There's not linear stages of grief, is what we found. And so if we're going to say, when it comes to the grief, that time will make it better, that's not always the case. And it also sets up a bad expectation, or a frustrating expectation, because if 1 year has passed and we're still grieving, then we feel awful. And those around us are like, what's wrong with you? And that's where a lot of separations happen, honestly, because the expectations were out of of a realistic proportion. And there's a lot of frustration when if we could just from the get-go understand that, hey, there's not a necessarily a time limit to certain things when it comes to grief. And recognize, so in the midst of that, like what it kind of drives home this point, in the midst of that grief, what are we doing to grow ourselves and to take steps towards healing, to be able to really process what went on? Because like for me personally, I might feel grief from deaths that have happened a decade ago now, randomly, at a holiday. But because I've processed it and I have resource as far as this is what I'm going to do when I feel this way, like I'm going to have positive thoughts, or I'm going to really focus in on what I'm thankful for, or whatever it may be, I'm able to get out of that. And so again, it's what are we doing in the midst of this time that is going to help us to heal? That's what's significant.
Yeah, I really like that you brought up the different timelines and how things can trigger us, or things can impact us differently. Like we could go through a long stretch and feel fine or not think about something. And then for some reason in a moment or in a season, something can impact us. And I think as a marriage, as a relationship, if we believe, oh, time heals all wounds, then you could be grieving something and I could come up and be like super insensitive. What? That's
Yeah,
15 years ago. Get over it.
it
Right.
happens. Yeah.
And
Or
so,
even, Chad, I want to comment on affairs, infidelity, where it happened and they're working through it. And then it gets to a point where, let's say the husband was unfaithful. Then the husband's like, why are you still holding this against me? Like it should have, like there was an expectation of when this should have been better. Right. So just wanted to add that in.
no, that's a really good example. That's common, right? Couples having to bounce back from broken trust in some capacity. And I think that's a classic example that time doesn't fix and heal that by itself. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and even if we create a fabricated timeline, we prevent somebody from sharing what they might be facing at some unknown time in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So then as a spouse, if we can come alongside and get a better understanding of, hey, what's going on? If somebody can have a safe space to share what they're feeling in that moment, then they might feel seen and heard and cared for, and then they might just bounce out of it. It could have been something just in that moment for some reason, and then they move on. But I think
Mm-hmm.
bigger picture, there are intentional actions that are a part of healing, that if we're taking some of those actions along with time, then I think we can anticipate increased strength and wholeness in that area. But to just stick our heads in the sand and ignore the pain or the brokenness or the grief and think that just time is going to fix it is an unrealistic expectation that I think down the road sets us up to feel bad about ourselves. Not because we're still feeling a certain way, but because we anticipated something that wasn't going to bring healing would bring healing.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Well, I have nothing to add to that. And so just to repeat the question again, does time heal hurts in marriage? Not necessarily. Depends on what you do in that time. Is these are our thoughts. And so